Staking is an important part of vegetable gardening. I have to stake beans, I have to stake runner beans, broad beans, runner beans, climbing French beans. I have to stake sweet peas, I have to stake some of the taller flowers. And this can lead to a lot of extra work, a lot of expense. And I'm fortunate enough to have twigs to hand. I coppice the hedgerows on a rotational basis, so I have a constant supply year round of twigs. And these are from last year, so they're quite brittle now, they're snapping, but they will do perfectly for peas. Now peas have a climbing mechanism of their own. It's called a tendril, and it will climb, it'll cling on to a support like a twig. And I'm also careful, as far as I possibly can be, to choose varieties that don't get too big. When I first started gardening at the Lost Gardens of Hilligan in Cornwall, we were growing old, what we called period correct varieties there, and the only varieties that we grew had to be in cultivation pre-1890. And most of the peas that were grown at that time, enormous, 6 foot plus, requiring huge quantities of staking and netting, and the whole thing was a real palaver. These Feltham First are only going to get 45 centimetres high, which is 1.5 feet. They're only going to get that high, which is perfect, which means I only need small twigs. I'm going to do a double row of twigs here as it happens, so they can go either way, and that gives a sort of a tunnel, as it were, a block of support for them. I'm lucky I've got the twigs, and then as time goes by, once they've started to cling to those, and as the crop grows, I will put a bigger stake in the middle when they've got a bit more vigorous and they've started to cling onto these twigs. But it's very important that you do give them something, because if you don't, and the heavy weather comes, the rain, and it gets cold, may appear lovely and warm and sunny today, but it's still only mid-April, and it's more than possible that we'll get some nasty cold weather before we get into the real warm second half of the spring. And if that happens and rain pushes a young crop over, then they're very vulnerable to slugs and to rot and all kinds of things. So support is vital. The tendrils are just beginning to curl, and when you see that, that means they're ready to cling on to something. And bit by bit, I'm just breaking up these small twigs, and that's it. And my other varieties of peas are also low growing ones. Kelvedon and Wonder is my next crop. I love peas, but you know this by now. And then after that, Hurst Green Shaft, and none of them get higher than waist height. So twigs are good. So you can use rows of chicken wire. You can put a bamboo cane in one end, and you can wrap the chicken wire around it, or thread the cane through the chicken wire and just stand a row of chicken wire along the row of peas. That's a good way. Force another cane in at the end to secure it, and the peas will grab onto that. Or you can use a bit more of a complicated setup by putting canes and wrapping string round, but they must have something to cling onto. Me, I prefer to use twigs, and when the twigs are done, I use them as kindling on the fire. They're very useful, and this will help support the peas. And also, the other thing it does early on in the life of the pea crop is that it will keep the pigeons away. And I can see that I've had 1 or 2 plants that have been nibbled by pigeons on the second sown crop of these. So that will deter them as well. It'll just make life a bit more difficult. So twigs are very good, and if you can get bundles of twigs, they're great things to have, because they serve many purposes, particularly good for the peas though.